Welcome back, everyone. Today was day 3 of the Fischer Random World Chess Championship being held here in Reykjavik, Iceland. Now, as you guys know, I was on the precipice of qualifying, and fortunately for me, in the first match of the day, I won very comfortably against Matthias Bluebaum to advance to the knockout portion. Now, this definitely set up a very strange situation, the final 6th match of the preliminaries, where I was playing against the world champion Magnus Carlsen, but with both of us already being qualified, it was definitely going to be a little bit wonky. So let's dive right into the match. So in this first game of our final match, Magnus starts by playing h4. Now, one funny thing is that obviously before the game, I'd looked at a couple different moves like c4, b4, even d4, but Wesley So, my fellow American Grandmaster, mentioned that Magnus might try something wild like 1h4, and sure enough, Magnus plays it. Now, after h4, it's a very strange situation to be in, because I have two options. Option 1 is to play h5, ignore all the silliness, and pretend that we're just playing chess. Option 2 is to make a quick move in the center, something like d5 or c5, and option 3 is to think for a couple of minutes and try to come up with the optimal setup to punish this pawn push on the wing. Now, I decided to just ignore all the silliness and play h5, and now Magnus continues with d4, and here I play the move pawn to b5, and already black is slightly better according to the computer, because white has the problem of having closed this diagonal from a1 to g7, while my bishop from a8 to h1 is open. Additionally, white cannot grab more of the center of c4 because I will capture the pawn on c4 with my pawn on b5. Magnus nonetheless plays pawn to c4. And here I play this move c5. Now, one thing that's very difficult here is that I wanted to initially take on c4 and play something like knight to d6 or d5. But having played a match against Levon Aroni in St. Louis, I think it was now 3 years ago, there were a couple of games where Levon would put a knight on d6, e6, or correspondingly e3 and d3, putting a knight in front of the pawns. Now, after that match, and as I've alluded to in other Fischer random videos that I've done, you don't generally want to put a knight in the center ahead of a pawn, like say on d7 for example, or ahead of a pawn on e7. On the edge of the board, it matters a lot less. This computer actually thinks that after knight d6 black is better here, but I wasn't really in the mood to spend a lot of time. There's no increment obviously in the first time control, so I just tried to play naturally. So here I played c5, and now Magnus took on b5. Now this move also took me by surprise, but considering the match situation, the fact we were both qualified, I wasn't 100% shocked by it. I felt that Magnus was going to want to play something very interesting. So Magnus takes on b5, and now I take on d4. We trade the rooks, and he plays b3. Now, it's a very unusual position here because my extra pawn is in the center. His extra pawn is sort of on the side of the board. It's really unclear whose pawn is better here. So I play bishop to b6, guarding the pawn. The idea, of course, to play e5 and then d6 and have this big black center. Magnus continues with knight f3, and now I play this move queen b7. Initially, I wanted to play the computer recommendation with bishop takes f3, but after e takes f3, I really wasn't sure what was going on, and long term I thought that, let's say I play e5 for example, white can play something like knight d2 and knight c4, maybe f4 later on, and also a4 and a5, and I just wasn't really sure if I should be better. Now, computer thinks that black is much better, but during the game, I didn't really want to spend a lot of time. Again, you only have 25 minutes. If I spend 5 to 10 minutes and I come up with the wrong setup and it's not concrete, I probably will lose the game. So instead I play queen b7 here, lining up the classic battery. If white captures on d4, that would run into checkmate with queen takes g2. So here a4 is played by Magnus. Now I play e5, building my big black center. Magnus plays e3 here, I take, and now I go astray by playing this move f6. As you guys would know from Grandmaster Benjamin Feingold, you never push pawn to f6 if you have not castled your king. Now, the reason I play this move is actually a miscalculation. After Magnus's next move b4, I thought initially I could play d5, and after say bishop b3 here, I can play something like bishop takes e3 and maybe knight e6 followed by castles, or even potentially a move like queen f7. Now, the problem is that if I play d5, as I realized during the game, white can simply capture on d5 right away, because after queen takes d5, white has bishop to b3, winning the queen. So this was my initial idea, but then I realized, I've done something wrong. So I continue, I play knight e6 here, Magnus goes bishop e3, and now I play this move knight c7, another inaccuracy. Probably I should have just taken on e3 and then played something like queen b6, and the position is relatively okay here because after a move like, let's say king f2 for example, I can go knight d6 with the idea of knight e4, and there's a lot of pressure here. And if white plays a move like queen e1, for example, again, knight d6 followed by either knight to e4 or potentially knight to f5, targeting the pawn on e3. So I probably should have done this, but I had already sort of resigned myself to the fact that I thought I was a little bit worse, and I thought I had to play for the center with knight c7 and d5. Now here Magnus plays a very interesting move, knight to f5, and after a long think, I play a bad move, which is knight to e8. Now, what I initially wanted to do is I wanted to play queen e4, but after queen takes e4, bishop takes e4, knight d6, bishop f3, g takes f3. It's an endgame. Amazingly, computer only thinks that white is very slightly better and not much better, but against a player like Magnus Carlsen who loves to squeeze in endgames, I thought, why do I want to do this? It doesn't really make a whole lot of sense because all I'm asking for is a lot of suffering. So instead I play knight e8 here, basically begging Magnus to show me the money, or more importantly, show me where the win is, and Magnus does not find it. He plays knight to e7, which is actually correct, and after king to f7, he plays this move knight to g6, very human, but this is actually a big mistake. What Magnus should do here is play this sort of counterintuitive move knight to c6 here, because it closes the diagonal. Now I have no threats, and if I capture the knight on c6, white can play this crushing move queen to f5, attacking the knight. And if I play a move like knight c7, there's knight g5 check here. I cannot capture with either the pawn or with the knight because I would lose my king. And if I play queen e7, more of the same. White can play knight g5, knight takes e5, even bishop takes e6, and it's a complete disaster. Instead, Magnus plays knight g6, and now after rook h6, the game gets very, very sharp. Magnus continues by playing this move queen to f5. I go knight to d6, and already here, Magnus was starting to mutter a little bit under his breath, so I could tell that he was very uncomfortable and didn't know what was going on. So he takes on e5 here. I play king to e8. He goes queen to d3. And now I play this move knight to e4. And it's really, really sharp here because if white moves the knight to c4, for example, I can just play knight takes f2. And if he goes knight d6, I go king f8 here. And this should be winning for black. So Magnus, after a very long think, ends up castling here. And now I take the knight on e5 and he takes back. So after all the dust is settled, I've sort of moved my king all over the board. f7, I think I moved it to e7 or e8, a couple of moves. King cannot castle, white has castled. I'm up a piece here with this knight on e4, but white has some pawns and some pressure in the center of the board. So in this position, I play rook to g6 here. Magnus plays a5, and now I played this move bishop to c7, which is apparently a mistake. Of course, if I was a computer, I would have played rook to g4 because now after white plays pawn takes bishop here, there's this ridiculous move knight to d2. And if white takes on d2, there's the bone crushing move rook takes g2, king takes g2, queen takes f3, king g1, queen to g2, checkmate. Now again, I'm only human, so I played this move bishop c7, a very logical move, by the way, because I want to remove this bishop. Ideally, I'd love to play rook takes g2, but after king takes g2, there's no knight to f4 because the bishop on e5 covers it. So I play bishop c7, idea to get rid of the bishops, and then go for the rook g2, knight f4 idea. Magnus plays a6 here. I play queen b6 to put pressure on the pawn on b2. I can also go queen b8, but now white can play rook d1, putting pressure on the pawn on d7. So by going to b6, rook d1 is not an option because then white would get checkmated. So Magnus plays bishop d5 here. Very precise move considering that Magnus had very limited time already. I think he was down to maybe a minute and a half here, or maybe 2 minutes, but he's very, very precise. So I trade on d5, I go knight to f6, and now he plays this move queen to a8 check, and I go king e7. Already here, I was feeling very optimistic about my chances, but Magnus continues to play very good moves. He plays rook e1 here. I play rook to g4, which is the best move, and now he trades and plays this move knight to e5, and this is where I make a big mistake. Now what's really sad about this game is that as soon as I play queen c3, I realized that I should have played rook takes b4, and after knight g6 I can run with the king to d6 here, and after white plays a move like queen to f3, there are a couple lines that are probably very good, but even a move like king c5 should be good. Actually, I guess king c5 doesn't work apparently, but a move like queen c2 and after rook d1, king, or not king 7, sorry, I guess king c5 followed by rook b1, and black should be winning. Again, very tricky to figure out over the board, but as soon as I played queen c3, I realized that I had this resource with takes, king d6, and for example, one other line just to show, which is rook d4, and this would be winning. Magnus did mention queen f3, by the way, after the game as the move that he was intending to play. So instead I play queen c3 here. Now Magnus plays king f1, and I go queen takes b4, and now Magnus blunders with knight takes g4. During the game, I was actually kind of concerned about this move queen b7 with the idea of knight c6 in the fork, and apparently I can play queen c5, and after b6 there's some kind of draw, but it's very, very wild. It's really unclear what exactly is going on, and I was kind of scared about this, but Magnus was very limited time. He took the rook on g4. I take back, and now he plays queen takes a7 here. I go knight h2, king g1, and this is really the critical moment in this endgame. Now, I played queen takes e1 pretty quickly here because I figured that after queen takes e1, king h2, queen e5, there has to be some technical way to win. Knight f3 is also another option that I can play, but after takes, queen takes e1, king 2, I believe h2 here, it's still very, very tricky because after queen e5, king g2, queen takes b5, queen b7, I can play queen c6, and it's probably better because white's pawn structure is compromised, but it's still not clear if there's an actual win here. However, I should have done this because in the game, when I take on e1 and check to collect the pawn on e5, white keeps his pawn chain intact here. So Magnus plays queen b7, I go queen c5, and now he plays this move king to g1, which I thought was actually a very smart move because after a7, I thought this was close to winning because now I can basically do a zigzag all over the board, and then at the right moment after king g1, I can play this move knight to c7, preventing white from queening the pawn. The queen also guards the knight. If white takes and makes a new queen, you lose the pawn on g3, and if white queens the pawn here, after knight takes a8, queen takes a8, with the extra central pawn, I thought I would get very good winning chances. Instead, Magnus plays this move king to g1, I check, and he goes back to h2, and here I really just could not figure out what the winning line is. Now, as it turns out, this move queen to c7 is correct, but after queen to b4, the move that I should have played was king to d8. Now, I don't remember exactly why I didn't play this move, but I think at the time, I simply thought that with this knight on e6 being able to always go to c7 and cover a8, the idea was not to run my king over to the queen side, but as it turns out, after king to d8 followed by queen to a7, this should probably be winning, although again, there still are tricks with f4 and f5 to undermine the knight, and ideas like queen f8 check potentially, so there still are tricks, but it should be winning. Instead, I play king to e8, and now Magnus goes queen b5, and here I play g6, which is a fairly serious mistake, and the reason it's a mistake is because now when I play g6, in all the endgames, I'm going to lose both the g and the h pawns, whereas, say white plays a move like, I don't know, queen, how do I do this? Let's say white plays a move like queen a3, let me just set this up. Let's say we set up some position like this, for example, just to illustrate the point. I still keep a g7 pawn on the board, and I'm going to win the pawn on a6, whereas white has 3 connected, but I still have a g pawn. Whereas in the game when I play g6, now, as you'll see, I do win this pawn on a6, but at the cost of losing my g and h pawns, and now it's probably already very close to a draw. The game continues with queen a1 check. Magnus plays king to g2. I go queen to d4, centralizing the queen and trying to push the pawn to d5 and run it up the board. Magnus plays queen f5. I try to bring my king back towards the king side to stop all these pawns. He plays h5. I go queen g7, f4, another very good move. Now I play d5, going for some trickery, because if white were to capture on d5, I have knight takes f4, and white cannot capture the knight because then the king would be in check, and it's a classic fork which ends the game. Magnus plays king h3 here. h6, by the way, would have drawn as well, because now we get queen and knight versus queen and 2 pawns. Instead, king h3 is played by Magnus. I go d4. He plays queen d5, queen f6, king g4, and now basically I just start running my king to try and stop the h pawn, but it's still not enough to win the game because Magnus is also able to put pressure on his pawn on d4, and sooner or later there are ideas like f5 to undermine the knight, or queen e5 even offering a trade of the queens. So I go king h6, king d3 is played, I play queen e7, queen e5, another very important move here, and now I make the check. It's worth noting I do have to be careful because say I play a random move like queen b3, I actually run into a checkmate myself. King has no squares here, and that would be a big oopsies. So I play queen b2, king f3, queen b7, king g4, and now basically have a little bit of a repetition. I go king h7, he checks, and after king h8, queen f6, I have to take the draw here, because if I go king f8, white can maybe even play h6 with the idea of h7, trying to play for the win, and with both of us down to 10 seconds on the clock, it just makes no sense in a match format to do that. Instead, I play king h8, and we repeat, and the game ends in a peaceful draw. A very, very exciting game. I had some chances to win. I also was definitely losing. So a very topsy-turvy first game of the match. So now let's move on to the second game. So the second game we play the same position, except colors are reversed, and here I start with the white pieces. So I decided to play b4 here. Now if I really had thought it through before the game, I probably would have played b3 and then f4, because in the game by playing b4, b6, f4, now black can play the c5 move, and it's very, very complex because I have to take on c5, giving up the f4 pawn, whereas if I really was set on playing the Nimzo Larsen bird setup, I could have played b3, b6, f4, c5, e3, followed by bishop f3. So instead I play b4, b6. Now I play f4 because of course as I said, I wanted to play a bird Nimzovich Larsen sort of setup, active bishop, go e3, and then bishop f3. And also the other reason I wanted to play this is because after yesterday's game against Vladimir Fedosey, the fourth and final game where it didn't work out, I was very stubborn and I wanted to insist that you can play these setups in Fischer Random. Of course, this is not correct because now after c5, I take, and Magnus takes on f4. Computer gives black a fairly big advantage here, shockingly to me, because I felt that at this point, I am going to have more central control with these pawns, c4, d4, e4, and bishop f3. So I thought that I was actually a little bit better, but computer thinks that black is actually quite a bit better, which is just kind of shocking. And I guess it's because after queen b8 takes bishop b6, bishop f3, black is just winning here. It's -1 after this move, h5. h5. Of course, black, it's -1.3 after h5. Again, don't ask me why. I'm not going to pretend to understand chess. At any rate, Magnus plays queen to f5 here. So after queen f5, we trade, and now I go bishop f3, trying to trade off my bad bishop on d1 for the very powerful bishop on a8. Magnus actually does play h5, the best move here, and again, as I said, I don't really understand why it's the best move, but it is. So I trade the bishops on a8, and now I go knight g3, attacking the queen. He plays queen g4, and now I castle my king out of the center. Now, in this position, Magnus plays a very human move, which is e6. And I initially thought h4 might be scary, but I realized that I have knight f5 targeting the pawn on e7, as well as the pawn on g7 potentially. And so I actually was not very concerned, and Magnus as well plays this move e6 to prevent knight f5. Now, after e6, this is a surprisingly big blunder, because when I play knight to f3, f6, I can now play c4 here, opening up diagonals for my queen to come to the center. I can also push c5 and c6, and black is definitely worse. Now here Magnus plays the move h4, and I end up playing queen e4, offering the queen trade. If black does not trade the queens, I guess queen g6, you would just lose the rook, so you kind of have to trade. Now already here I was quite optimistic because black is underdeveloped here, and additionally I have a better pawn center in the game. I can play c5, c6, also d4 as well, and it feels very active for me. There's also a weakness on h4 to boot. So here Magnus plays knight g6, now I go c5, bishop c7, and now I play c6. Now, it's interesting to note the computer does not love this idea, but to me it seemed very thematic, because if black plays d5 and I get knight c5 here, I felt that after e5, rook b1, this pawn on c6 was going to be very strong. I have rook b7, rook c1, maybe even knight e6, and I thought I should be much better here. Of course, computer is saying that black is much better, so it just goes to show that I don't know anything, but that's life. And we already knew that, of course. So instead, Magnus plays the human move, pawn takes pawn, but now after knight to d4, you're going to start to notice that after e5, knight f5, black's pieces are very disjointed here. This knight on e8 cannot get into the game. There are no squares really available here. You don't have any jumps, so it's a bad knight. Now, Magnus, to his credit, found a very good move with bishop d8, and the reason it's such a good move is that if I play rook takes c6, black can now go knight to e7, trading the knights off, and even though white is probably better here after rook b1 castles and rook to b7, I thought that after rook f7, eventually black should be able to make a draw, and I didn't think it was enough. So because I didn't think it was enough, I decided to try and play very actively with this move pawn to d4, trying to bring my bishop into the game. As you'll notice, there's this nice little connect 4 here, and my bishop is very passive. So by playing d4, the idea is that after takes, now I have a classic wooden shield for starters, but also a very active bishop as well on d4. So Magnus plays this move knight to e7, and now I decide to play a very interesting exchange, piece sacrifice, I should say, with knight takes g7. Now I could have traded on e7 and played rook c6, and again, it's probably a very marginal advantage for white. Black really only has one weakness on a7, and again, I didn't really think I could win this, so I thought, you know what, I'm already qualified, knight takes g, this piece sack looks interesting, let's just play it. So I play knight takes g7, Magnus takes, and now I play knight takes f6, and here he plays king to g6. The only move, by the way, knight takes knight would lose the game, because after takes, king g8, I go rook f8, king g7, and I think after rook f1, I'm much better. Actually, computer is only giving this as a small advantage, but I thought already here this is very, very dangerous. I have rook f7 ideas, I have rook e8. Black's bishop and knight are not active. The rook is also very passive on a8. I thought this would be very, very difficult for Magnus to play, and he correctly plays king g6 instead. And now the problem is that if I trade the knights on e8, I'm simply down a knight, so I can't do that. So instead I play knight to d7 here, attacking the rook on h8, and now I have two ideas. My knight can go either to e5 or to f8 next move. So now Magnus plays rook g8, and here after a long think, I kind of had to bail out with this move knight e5. I really wanted to play knight to f8 here, but after king to h6, rook to f7, knight d6, I simply did not see a continuation here. If I play rook f6 check, black can block, and now if I take the knight, I lose the rook. If I play rook takes d6, rook f8, rook c6, rook g8, it's probably still a draw, but here black keeps 2 pawns on the board, and there are some chances that I could lose this endgame. So I didn't want to do that, and also after king h6, rook f7, knight d6, rook f6, knight g6, it's a great pity that if I trade everything on g6 and play rook c6, bishop to e7, say bishop c5 here, black can now, actually not bishop c5, sorry, bishop to e5, black can now play rook to d8, and black is probably a little bit better again, and I'm simply down a knight in the endgame. So I really wanted to play knight f8, but when I couldn't make it work, I finally just decided to resign myself to a draw with knight e5. Now here Magnus plays the move king to h7. If he goes king to h6, for example, here, I do not trade the knights on c6, because after takes, rook g6, again, black is much better. But after king h6 here, I can now play this amazing move, rook to c5, and now there's some serious threats with knight to f7, or even rook to f7, and black could be in trouble. Additionally, I can also just make a draw with knight f7, because if he goes to h7, we trade, and then I have rook f7 check, collecting the knight on e7, so black would have to go king g6, knight e5, and there's a simple bailout. So instead, Magnus plays king h7, trying to keep the game alive. Now I play knight takes pawn, Magnus trades, and after rook takes c6 here, the game has more or less petered out. I have very active rooks, the rook on c6 and the rook on f1 going to f7. Additionally, with the wooden shield and the target on a7, I really should not be in any danger of losing. So here Magnus plays rook g6, I go rook f7, and now he plays this strange move king g8. He could have just played king h6 on the spot, and after rook takes a7, rook to b8, let's say we trade, this game should end in a draw, but I don't see how black can actually end up worse. Whereas in the game, after Magnus plays the move king to g8, I now have rook takes a7, and black has to be careful here, because if you take the rook on a7, I take the rook on g6 with check, and after king f7, bishop takes a7, king g6, I can go king f2, king f3, and a4, and I have 3 pawns for the knight here, and there are maybe some chances to win this if black is not super precise. So I was very surprised by this. Magnus instead takes on c6, I take on a8, and he goes rook d6, and now the dust is settled. We have an endgame where I have 3 pawns. I have 3 pawns for the knight on e8. Black only has 1 pawn on the board, so I really don't run any risk of losing the game. So after rook to d6, I play this move a4. Magnus goes knight to c7. I play rook b8, knight to a6, play rook b7. The rest of the game is pretty straightforward, not a whole lot to comment on, but it goes on. Rook c6, king f2, bishop c7, and now I play king to f3. Here Magnus could have tried to play a move like rook g6, but after rook g6 there are a couple options I have. First of all, I can just go rook b5, bishop takes h2, and rook b6 to force the trade anyway. I can also play g3, and after takes, king e4. I only have 2 pawns for the knight, but again, this should be a draw pretty easily. So Magnus plays bishop takes h2 instead, which allows me to play rook b6, exchanging the rooks, because if black moves the rook away, you simply lose the knight on a6. And now with only 1 pawn on the board, even though I only have 2 pawns for the knight, I can never lose. Additionally, I have the wide peepos as well, so if black is careless, there could be some winning chances. So here Magnus plays king f7, I go bishop to d8, bishop g3, king g4, and now he finds knight c5. If black were to play a move like bishop e1, after bishop takes a4, this is very, very tricky, because with the 3 wide peepos, there are definitely chances for me to win the game. But Magnus, to his credit, plays knight c5. Now I play pawn to a5 here. He goes bishop f2. I go e4, of course. If I play king f3, he can just play a move like bishop e1. And sooner or later, I'm going to have to exchange the a5 pawn for the pawn on h4, and the game will end in a draw. So I play e4 here, hoping for a little bit of trickery. Magnus takes the pawn, and now I go king f3, attacking both the knight and the bishop. Unfortunately, black has king e8 here, and we have this weird position where my bishop on d8 is completely dominated. There really are no good squares available. If I play bishop b6, Magnus can trade and then go knight d6, preventing the pawn from going to b7. And after king g4, king d7, king h4, king c6, g4, knight to e4. Game would end in a draw, because sooner or later I'll have to push the g pawn, and we end up with only kings on the board. So it'd be really nice if I could play bishop b6, but unfortunately it doesn't work. So I play bishop c7 here. Magnus plays king to d7 in this position. And now I play the move bishop to f4, trying to keep some play in the position. If I play a move like bishop h2, which is also possible, black can simply go bishop g3. And now when I go a6, king c6, a7, king b7, the game will again be a draw. So I play bishop to f4 here, and Magnus plays bishop e1. The only move, by the way, it's or maybe not only move, but the super critical move, because if black does not have bishop e1 here, the game goes on. And if I can keep the extra a pawn on the board, say black plays a move like king c6, king b5, bishop d2, while this is a draw, there will be some winning chances for white. Magnus, of course, plays bishop e1. I go a6, and the last real hope here is that Magnus might blunder and move the knight, allowing me to queen the pawn. But of course, this is the world champion we're talking about, and he plays king c6, giving up the knight on e4, but in return, winning the pawn on a6. And now this is just a classic draw. I go king f3, he takes, I go bishop to e3, and now Magnus plays h3, gambiting the pawn. Now, it's worth noting that I could take on h3, but now if I take, he goes king b7. The only way to try and push the pawn is to go bishop f2, but with the pawn on the edge, black's king is in plenty of time to get all the way over and stop the h pawn. So this would be a draw. And I decided to play g4. It doesn't really matter, because all roads lead to Rome. But I play g4, and after bishop h4, I go g5. He plays h2, king g2, of course, not letting Magnus queen the h pawn. And after bishop takes g5, bishop takes g5, Magnus makes a knight. And I play king takes h1, and the game ends in a draw. And with that, we draw both of our games. We both advance to the semifinals, which will begin on Saturday. If I'm not mistaken, I will be playing as Norbek Abdusatorov, who won his group with I don't even know what his score was, but he was definitely dominating. He beat up on Jan Nepomniachtchi and Wesley So. He was very convincing. So I'm really looking forward to playing it against him, and we'll see how it goes. So I hope you guys enjoyed the recap from today, day number 3 of the Fischer Random World Chess Championship being held here in Reykjavik, Iceland. I'll be back with another recap on Saturday. See you guys soon.